JonBenét Ramsey. That name still evokes a deep sense of dread to this day. A 6-year-old girl with blonde hair and an innocent face, she became well known across the United States through child beauty pageants. She was loved, cherished, and treated like a living doll. But then, on the morning of December 26, 1996, the body of JonBenét was found in the basement of her own home in Boulder, Colorado. She died with her neck strangled, a long crack on her head, and all that remained was a bizarre ransom note and a family forever broken. Among the many theories proposed over the nearly 3 decades since, one theory stands out as both plausible and deeply controversial. JonBenét may have been struck on the head with a baseball bat, and it could have been an accident caused by someone in the house, specifically her older brother, Burke Ramsey. Before we dive into the main content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support me in the future. And let me know your thoughts on this case after watching the video. Now, let's get started. According to the coroner's report, JonBenét had a crack in her skull about 8.5 inches long, an extremely serious injury. Yet, there was very little blood, which suggests that she might have been struck after losing consciousness or while having very little circulation left. Forensic pathologist John Meyer confirmed that although JonBenét died from strangulation, the blow to the head alone would have been fatal. Some experts, including Dr. Werner Spitz, who has been involved in the several high-profile cases, argue that the blow from a hard object, like a baseball bat, was the primary cause of death, and the strangulation could have been a cover-up or a final attempt to stage the crime scene. In the CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, Dr. Spitz clearly stated that he believed Burke, then just 9 years old, got angry and accidentally caused his sister's death, followed by a series of reactions from the parents to protect their son and their family. If you've ever lived in a family with 2 children, you'll understand the concept of unconscious jealousy. JonBenét was the center of attention. She won beauty pageants, appeared on the news and television, and her parents, especially her mother Patsy, invested everything from clothing to makeup to training schedules. Burke, on the other hand, was a quiet, reserved boy, often overlooked. Some say that on Christmas night, Burke was eating pineapple, his favorite, when JonBenét entered the kitchen and quietly grabbed a piece. It's a small detail, but it could have been the beginning of the tragedy. In JonBenét's stomach, the autopsy revealed undigested pineapple. On the dining table, police found a bowl of pineapple and a spoon with Burke's fingerprints. Could that have been the trigger? A blow and a sudden burst of anger from a child who couldn't control his emotions? This theory is further supported by the location of the baseball bat discovered in the Ramsey house. It was found near the back door, covered in dust, but placed as though it had just been used. No one in the family mentioned it in their initial statements. The police also suspected that the bat might have been the weapon used to injure JonBenét. But what makes the public even more uncomfortable is not the idea that Burke struck his sister, but the question, if this was truly an accident, why didn't anyone in the house call for emergency help? Why write a ransom note over 2 pages long, demanding a very specific amount of money, $118,000, which coincidentally matched the bonus John Ramsey had just received from his company? This is where the theory takes a turn. Maybe JonBenét didn't die immediately after the blow. Maybe Patsy or John, in a moment of panic and realizing their daughter had been seriously injured by her own brother, decided to cover it up together. They staged the scene, created a story about a kidnapping, placed her body in the basement, used a garrote to strangle her to misdirect the investigation, and then wrote a long, bizarre ransom note with odd language. Some parts eerily similar to lines from movies like Dirty Harry or Speed, which were popular at the time. These actions could have been the result of panic, or they could be signs of a calculated decision in an extreme situation. However, not everyone believes in this theory. The Ramsey family, especially the parents, has strongly opposed it. In an interview with Ashley Banfield, John Ramsey stated very clearly, "Burke couldn't have done this. The boy doesn't have behavioral issues, and we are parents. If something had happened, we would have told the truth." Not only did they speak out, but the Ramsey family also sued CBS for suggesting the theory involving Burke, and they won the lawsuit, receiving hundreds of millions in damages. That cannot be ignored, because if there wasn't strong evidence, no one would dare stand before a court and point at a child, claiming they were responsible for their sister's death. Moreover, if this was an accident orchestrated by the parents, then why didn't the DNA under JonBenet's nails and in her underwear match any family member? This is a question that makes the accident theory falter. Could it be that a third party actually entered the house, killed the little girl, and left without leaving clear evidence? But when we look deeper into the psychological aspect, especially the parents' psychology, things become even more complicated. Candace DeLong, a former FBI agent and behavior analyst, once shared, "If I were a mother and I knew my son had accidentally killed my daughter, I'm not sure I'd act any differently." In that moment, what you think about isn't justice, it's the fear of losing everything. Perhaps that's why the truth has been locked away for 28 years. We will never know for certain what happened that Christmas night. It may have been an accident, it may have been a deliberate crime, but it's also possible that the truth lies in the fragile line between the two. A moment of recklessness, followed by a series of wrong decisions, causing everything to spiral out of control. And then, a little angel was taken, leaving behind secrets that perhaps only she knew. But if the theory of the head injury is true, why was JonBenét still strangled? An act that seems unnecessary, even cruel, if she had already passed out or was dying. And if the accident happened in the house, why was there a sophisticated, handcrafted murder weapon? A garrote, a type of noose not commonly seen in the U.S.? This is when the second theory comes into play. A darker theory, one with more intention, and even more shadows. The JonBenét's death was the result of a deliberate strangulation, possibly by a mentally disturbed person or someone in the house intentionally taking her life. A garrote, an instrument typically seen in medieval executions or spy movies. In this case, it was made from a white nylon cord tightly bound to the broken handle of an old paintbrush. The paintbrush was Patsy Ramsey's personal item, confirmed to be from the art room in the house. It wasn't in the kidnapper's bag, and there was no sign it was brought from outside. It was created right there, in the house, by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The forensic pathologist determined that JonBenét was still alive when strangled. The hemorrhages in her eyes and neck indicate that this wasn't a staged act. It was real, a slow, cruel process, lasting more than a few seconds, possibly several minutes. The person responsible didn't just want to stage the scene. They wanted JonBenét to die, not out of sudden rage, but as a deliberate decision. This is what has led many to suspect this was no accident, but a true act of murder. In her final moments, JonBenét was bound with cord behind her back, her mouth taped shut, and garroted to the point of suffocation. This is not how someone hides an accident. This is how someone controls the situation, their emotions, and the victim. An act with the signs of sexual violence intertwined with psychological control. FBI behavior analyst, retired agent Greg McCrary, once stated, "The way the body was handled, the tool was made, and the timing of the act all show that the perpetrator had a clear objective. This wasn't a reaction born from fear. This was staging." There's even a theory that the garrote was the real murder weapon, while the blow to the head was a secondary action. Perhaps JonBenét was abused, resisted, screamed, and the attacker decided to silence her forever. The blow to the head came later, either to finish the job or to mislead the investigation. This theory was even mentioned by renowned filmmaker and journalist Barbara Walters in a 2000 special. She asked, if this was a kidnapping or an accident, why strangle her to death? And why use an item from the house, like a paintbrush? Another question worth considering. If this was an outsider, how did they know where to find the tools, how to make the garrote, and move through the large house without waking anyone? The Ramsey house had an alarm system, yet there was no signal of an intrusion. Could it be that the perpetrator was someone inside the house? A family member who knew how to access Patsy's belongings? Someone familiar with the layout of the basement, where the body was found? The story becomes even more complicated when we examine the psychological aspects of strangulation. This act requires close contact, a prolonged period, and usually carries a very specific motive. Not to scare, but to punish or control. In many cases, strangulation is considered a sign of deep-seated anger, jealousy, or deviant sexual desire. JonBenét showed signs of possible sexual abuse, though the extent and timing have never been definitively confirmed. But these signs make one ask, is this a murder fueled by lust? Or is it punishment from someone in the family? Burke, the brother, is excluded from this theory, as strangulation requires strength, persistence, and skill that a 9-year-old child would likely not possess. John, the father, was reportedly asleep all night, only waking up when Patsy discovered the ransom note the following morning. But this too is disputed, as both parents' statements contain discrepancies about the timing, how they found the note, and how they reacted. Patsy remains a central figure of suspicion, particularly because the paintbrush belonged to her, and the handwriting in the ransom note bears similarities to hers. But could a mother really kill her own daughter in such a brutal way? Some psychologists have proposed a rare mental disorder, Munchausen by proxy syndrome, where the caregiver, usually the mother, harms the child to attract attention or control the situation. However, there is no direct evidence supporting this theory in Patsy's case. Then there's another possibility, a third party, perhaps someone familiar with the family, with access to the house. This person would know how to navigate the basement, where to find tools in the house, and when the family was likely to be asleep. But the question remains, if it was an outsider, why were there no signs of forced entry? No sounds to wake anyone in the night? And why go through the trouble of creating a complex tool like the garrote, instead of simply using a knife or gun like most other intrusions? Ultimately, the strangulation theory presents an even more unsettling feeling, because it's not simply an accident. It's an act with intent, a process that required thought, execution, and completion. That means someone chose to kill JonBenét, chose to watch her struggle, suffocate, and slowly slip away. Chose not to stop. And that is what makes us unable to forget this case. Not just because a child died, but because of the coldness, the calculation, and the silence that has lingered for decades after that death. Was JonBenét's death the end of a long chain of aberrant behavior within the family? Or was it the cold cut of an outsider quietly entering and leaving as if they never existed? We don't have the answers, only a conclusion locked in the basement, and a sob that was never spoken. If the theory of the baseball bat strike evokes the image of an impulsive accident, and the strangulation theory suggests clear calculation and intent, the final theory stirs a sense of ambiguity. No one knows exactly what happened. Yet, it is precisely this ambiguity that makes it the most plausible theory for many. That JonBenét's death was the result of a simple push, a straightforward accident occurring in a fleeting moment of unintended action, and then covered up by a chain of irreversible lies. This is the theory supported by many psychologists, not for its dramatic appeal, but because it aligns with the typical human reaction in a state of shock, panic, and fear. A 6-year-old child, waking up in the middle of the night, might have been looking for a toy or simply going to the bathroom. In the dark hallway, someone unexpectedly bumps into her. It could have been Burke, it could have been Patsy, or maybe John. A light shove or a misstep that results in a fall, and JonBenét falls, hitting her head hard on a surface, a staircase, a table edge, or even the marble floor. She loses consciousness. No blood spills out, but inside her brain is severely damaged. The 8.5-inch crack in her skull, noted by the forensic pathologist, could have come from a fall in an awkward position. No need for the force of a baseball bat. No need for a murderous intent. Accidents like this have happened in other cases, where the victim simply slipped, hit their head on the floor, and died. And when a child is unconscious, their skin grows cold, and their breath becomes faint. What would parents think? They panic. They think their child is dead, and in those few moments of panic, survival instincts outweigh reason. This theory suggests that JonBenét's death started innocently, but then everything spirals into a series of lies, either from fear or from a love too strong to face the truth. Imagine, in the middle of the night, in a quiet house, a child lies unconscious. The parents lean down, check, and find no response. No one wants to believe their child is dead. No one wants to call 911 and admit that they let their child die from a fall. Instead of seeking help, they create a story about a kidnapping, a ransom note, a complex crime scene. They place her body in the basement, a place rarely visited. They leave a garrote behind, not to kill her, but to misdirect the investigation. And in their emotional turmoil, they fabricate a crime they never expected would be scrutinized for decades. The reactions of Patsy and John Ramsey after the incident have always been a point of contention. Many have argued that they seemed performative, not genuine, and spoke in circles during interviews. But if you believe this theory, their reactions are very human. When someone lives with guilt, they often create a shell to protect themselves. They cling to the story they've made as a way to avoid the truth. And the saddest part is, if this truly was an accident, it's their fear that ended up truly killing JonBenet. The push theory is further supported by a small but noteworthy detail: how the Ramsey family reacted to the death of their daughter. They did not agree to have the body re-examined. They didn't let their daughter stay long in the morgue. They immediately hired lawyers, reached out to the media, and distance themselves from local law enforcement. If they were truly the victims of a kidnapping and murder, why would they be so afraid of the legal system? Could it be that they knew the accident was real, but the consequences were already irreversible? However, many people reject this theory for an obvious reason. No one accidentally shoves a child and then strangles them with a garrote, a complex tool that takes time to make. If this were an accident, the natural reaction would be panic, crying, calling for help, not making a weapon. Forensic expert Henry Lee, who investigated the O.J. Simpson case, once said, "I've seen many accidents covered up, but no one invents a whole script like that, unless they are desperate or there's something much worse they need to hide." Another point that weakens the push theory is the strange DNA found on JonBenet's clothes. It didn't match any family member. If the death was just an accident, then the appearance of foreign DNA is puzzling. However, modern investigators suggest that this could be DNA contamination from the clothing manufacturing process, as children's clothing often passes through many hands before it reaches consumers. This theory doesn't rule out the accident, but highlights that in a case like JonBenet's, no detail is ever simple. In the end, the push theory isn't as shocking as the other theories. It doesn't evoke the drama of a premeditated murder or a sexual crime. But perhaps that's why it's harder to face, because it reminds us of the fragility of life. How a moment of unintentional action, a wrong decision in a fleeting second, can lead to an irreversible tragedy, and about the fear humans feel when faced with the consequences. Maybe JonBenét didn't die immediately. Maybe she was still breathing, and if someone had just called 911 at that moment, things could have been different. But they didn't, because they were human. And humans, sometimes, act their worst not out of malice, but because of fear. JonBenét is dead, but the story of her death lives on, in the pain, in the doubt, and in the theories that have never been confirmed. We may never know the truth, but when looking at those three theories, the blow, the strangulation, and the fatal push, all that remains is an unspoken question. Is the truth being hidden, or has it become too fragile to exist? And so, after three theories, three perspectives, and thousands of details woven between truth and assumption, I know we still don't have an answer. Perhaps we never will. But what makes the case of JonBenét Ramsey so haunting isn't just who the perpetrator is. It's the feeling that something very bad happened and no one truly dares to face it. I don't know who killed JonBenét, but I believe someone knows. Someone saw her last glance. Someone touched her skin as it grew cold. Someone chose to remain silent. And if the truth is buried so deeply, then it's not just a failure of the investigative system, but a failure of conscience. And you, the one listening, you may not be a police officer, a lawyer, or a journalist, but you are someone who has the ability to feel. And that feeling, that instinct you get when hearing each theory, is what makes this story never leave our minds. Whether you lean towards it being an accident, a deliberate act, or the work of an unseen third party, you are still holding on to something very precious, your belief in justice. Some say the past is something that can't be changed, but I don't believe that, because as long as there are people who speak the name JonBenét with respect, with sorrow, the past still has a chance to be illuminated, not to punish, but to listen, to understand, and to ensure that something like this never happens again. If you believe this story matters, If you believe that a child deserves to be protected until the very last moment, I invite you to continue this journey with me. Share the video so more people can listen. Leave your thoughts, not just on who's right or wrong, but what we can learn from this heartbreaking death. Thank you for your time. Thank you for not turning away from the truth, even when it's hard to swallow and unclear. I look forward to seeing you in the next videos.